even decided to go ahead with the creation. Yet he decides to go ahead with it with all his godly logic. Why would he want to do that? The question, if I can just put it in this manner, how can God be so sadistic that he would actually go ahead with a plan which he knows is going to end up in that manner? That's the first side of the coin. The second side of the coin is, for some reason, if I believe that, okay, God is almighty and he understands everything is great, God is great, why is God insisting in the Quran that look at the mountains, look at the protons, the electrons, this and that, everything is so synchronized, how amazing I am? Why is he forcing us to find his creation amazing when it is a piece of cake for God? I mean, he just had to say kun and it was done. Then why is it a big deal if God has made this entire universe which is so amazing? Because for God it's nothing. So I should not be really amazed at his creation. He can do much more than this. So I do not understand why he wants us to respect what he has done or find it amazing what he has done.
Well, that's a very good question and a very intellectual question. That's a very good question. And he has seen some of my tapes on YouTube, even of atheism, and this question that's troubling him, he hasn't got the answer to. The brother asked the question that Almighty God knows everything before he created the heaven and the earth, before he created human being, before Prophet Muhammad came here, peace be upon him, he knew everything. If he knew that some will go to heaven, majority will go to hell, so why did he create the human being? Isn't it sadistic? Is the basic question, correct? Second question will come to it later on. Brother, who told you that majority will go to hell?
Well, even if one person is going, it doesn't make any sense.
Even if one person goes to
He could avoid that.
hell, he could have avoided that.
I mean, he could avoid being disappointed.
Of course. I'll reply.
When you then try to understand these pictures, you find out that buried in them are computer codes, just like the type that you find in a browser when you go surf the web. And so I'm left with the puzzle of trying to figure out whether I live in the Matrix or not.
Wait, you're blowing my mind at this moment. So you're saying as you dig deeper, you find computer code.
Computer code, strings of bits of ones and zeros.
It's not just sort of resembles computer code, you're saying it is computer code.
It's not even just is computer code, it's a special kind of computer code that was invented by a scientist named Claude Shannon in the 1940s. That's what we find very, very deeply inside the equations that occur in string theory and in general in systems that, let's say, are supersymmetric.
This is a real disconnect, and it's very hard to get your head around. Modern ideas coming from black holes tell us that reality is two-dimensional, that the three-dimensional world, the full-bodied three-dimensional world, is a kind of image of a hologram on the boundary of the region of space.
This is a very strange thing. When I was a younger physicist, I would have thought any physicist who said that was absolutely crazy.
Here's a way to think about this. Imagine I took my wallet and threw it into a black hole. What would happen? We used to think that since nothing, not even light, can escape the immense gravity of a black hole, my wallet would be lost forever. But it now seems that may not be the whole story. Recently, scientists exploring the math describing black holes made a curious discovery. Even as my wallet disappears into the black hole, a copy of all the information it contains seems to get smeared out and stored on the surface of the black hole, in much the same way that information is stored in a computer. So, in the end, my wallet exists in two places. There's a three-dimensional version that's lost forever inside the black hole, and a two-dimensional version that remains on the surface as information.
The information content of all the stuff that fell into that black hole can be expressed entirely in terms of just the outside of the black hole. The idea then is that you can capture what's going on inside the black hole by referring only to the outside.
And in theory, I could use the information on the outside of the black hole to reconstruct my wallet. And here's the truly mind-blowing part. Space within a black hole plays by the same rules as space outside a black hole or anywhere else. So if an object inside a black hole can be described by information on the black hole surface, then it might be that everything in the universe, from galaxies and stars to you and me, even space itself, is just a projection of information stored on some distant two-dimensional surface that surrounds us. In other words, what we experience as reality may be something like a hologram.
Is the three-dimensional world an illusion in the same sense that a hologram is an illusion? Perhaps. I'm inclined to think yes, that the three-dimensional world is a kind of illusion, and that the ultimate precise reality is the two-dimensional reality at the surface of the universe.
This is the Illustrious Project, a giant cosmological simulation with the aim of studying the formation and evolution of galaxies. It's an ongoing project in which scientists use the most precise data and calculations currently available to create the most precise model of the universe possible. At its highest resolution, it had a volume of 106.5 cubic megaparsecs, took several months to complete on a supercomputer with 8,192 cores, used 25 terabytes of RAM at its peak, and had a particle count of over 18 billion. Of course, it's only realistic to a certain extent and from a very narrow perspective. The simulation is detailed enough that they can actually zoom in on individual galaxies, but it's not detailed enough to simulate the birth of each individual star or planet, and certainly not the astronomical numbers of individual molecules and atoms and so on. Instead, they have to approximate how a galaxy behaves as a whole without actually simulating all of its individual parts and properties. And once the simulation arrived at present day, the result was strikingly similar to what we observe in the universe. And by constantly tweaking these approximations, increasingly realistic results can be achieved, never quite reaching true realism, but hopefully realistic enough.
Every possible chunk of information exists, including the ones that perfectly describe the moments of consciousness that we experience from one moment to the next. In quantum mechanics, we have had theories of a holographic universe, where the entire universe could be seen as a two-dimensional structure containing all the information that we seem to perceive in 3 dimensions. In a new model, all of existence is encoded in quantized moments of consciousness that contain all of our experiences. Every moment of experience is a reality in itself, and we experience time as obvious and straightforward. But with each moment of consciousness containing a different set of memories and experiences, it wouldn't matter if our timeline was completely scrambled. Tomorrow could happen before yesterday. Our memories are dependent on the information encoded within each moment of consciousness, and can only tell us something about the reality we experience right now. Any perception of time or continuity is actually an illusion. This is one of the reasons why Robert Lanza's recent theory was considered to be a wake-up call by NASA's astrophysicist David Thompson. When we look at the Big Bang, or when we observe how quantum particles jump back and forth in time, we have the arrogance of assuming that time simply moves forward in a straight line, and we then go on to see these time anomalies as unusual and counterintuitive. But there is no indication that our perception and memories define the arrow of time. All of this seems to suggest that our reality would completely disintegrate, or at the very least, become highly inconsistent and random at any point. But the reason why we experience a rigid world with deeply structured laws of nature is because consistent patterns evolve according to mathematical principles. Since every possible pattern can exist within infinity, The only connection between two independent quantized moments of consciousness is the information that overlaps. Smaller or more compressed units are more common, and the laws that we are subject to naturally emerge and bring about our consistent reality as it is the most probable one. Patterns can be found in any type of chaos, and since very complex structures are required for consciousness to exist, the reality that we experience evolves along the probable branches of its own specific pattern. If neural disorders such as Capgras syndrome have taught us anything, it's that we have an incredible ability to rationalize the oddities in our reality. There is one claim, though, that becomes hard to refute: that the pattern of quantized moments of experience is inherently infinite, and statistically, an afterlife is inevitable.
The fine-tunings, how fine-tuned are they? Most of them are 1% sort of things. In other words, if a thing is 1% different, everything is bad. And a physicist could say, maybe those are just luck. On the other hand, this cosmological constant is tuned to 1 part and 10 to the 120, 120 decimal places. Nobody thinks that's accidental. That is not a reasonable idea, that something is tuned to 120 decimal places just by accident. That's the most extreme example of fine-tuning.
No force in the history of cosmology has ever been discovered to be that finely tuned. The cosmological constant needs to be set to 1 part in a trillion, 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 trillion. Otherwise the universe would be so drastically different that it would be impossible for us to evolve. That the cosmological constant arrived at such a tiny value by chance seemed to be out of the question.
Wow. Now, can anyone get their mind around a number that big? There's only 10 to the 80th elementary particles in the entire universe. There's only 10 to the 16th seconds since the Big Bang. There's only 10 to the 139th total events since the beginning of the universe. Now you're starting to get the understanding of why people are very skeptical that the chance hypothesis is going to do the job. Now, you may have heard just the opposite. Has anyone ever gotten in a discussion with you about the origin of life and said, hey, it happened by chance? I mean, do you hear that? I mean, this happens to me. I'll be lecturing in hostile university environments, and I'll get done and somebody say, well, but, and they want to argue with me about the probabilities. And I just shut the discussion down because I say, no serious scientist thinks this is the way it happened. No serious scientist thinks this is the way it happened. No serious scientist thinks this is the way it happened.
The brother said, even if one person goes to hell, it is as though God would be disappointed. God doesn't get disappointed ever.
He doesn't have to go ahead with that situation. He's not bound by any situation.
Brother saying Almighty God can create something which is perfect and will not make mistake, correct? That right. God has already done. He created the angels. God created the angels. The angel never go against any commandment of God. But human being is a better creation than angel. The angels have got no free will of their own. If you have heard my tapes, if you have not heard, I'll tell you now. The angels are a creation of Almighty God, but not the best creation. Almighty God created the human beings. The human beings have a free will to go against God or to follow God. If you have chosen to be a human being, if you disobey His commandments, you go to hell. If you obey His commandments, you are superior than the angel. Because the angel doesn't have a free will of his own, then he follows God. It's nothing great. The human beings are the better creation of Almighty God. Almighty God has given a free will. That's the different question that Almighty God knows. Because He has ilm ghaib, He has knowledge of the future. He is more superior. So He has created such a creation which has a free will. The fault is of human being, not God.
No, but God has created us with that fault. And He knows He can avoid that.
Not fault. It's not fault, brother. It is free will.